Bonjour et bienvenue au cadre de Fiscalité. Vous pouvez confirmer votre lettre d'équipe H. Est-ce que vous préférez la lecture de règlement en français ou en anglais?
En anglais.
For this case, you'll have 20 minutes to make your presentation in front of the judges. If your presentation lasts under 18 minutes, you will receive a 1-point penalty for every 30 seconds. If your presentation lasts under 10 minutes, your team will receive the score of 0 at the general ranking of this case. If after 20 minutes you have not completed the presentation, you will be stopped to move on the period of questions. At the end of the presentation, the judges will have 5 minutes to ask their questions. I remind the jury that it's mandatory to ask a minimum of 1 question during this period. If after 5 minutes you have not finished answering the question, you will be stopped. Throughout the presentation, I will indicate the remaining time using cardboards at 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 30 seconds. I will make a countdown using my finger for the last 10 seconds. I remind you that it's prohibited to say the name of your university, and you will receive a penalty. Also remind the public that it's prohibited to use any electronic receipts during the presentation, and that the public must stay quiet until the end of the period of question. Before we begin, I'm asking the room to turn off their cell phones and put them on mute so that we don't interrupt the presentation. I will now ask the judges to present themselves, and after you'll be free to start your presentation.
François Louis XVI, directeur régional, IG Gestion de patrimoine, bureau de Boisbriand.
Fernand Loisel, planificateur financier, directeur régional pour l'IG Gestion de patrimoine Montréal downtown.
Martin Diane, IG Gestion de patrimoine, directeur régional de Tapon-Maché.
Vanessa Tremblay, directrice dans le département des services aux compagnies privées chez PwC.
Oudlinga Delva, fiscaliste chez Revenu Québec.
Since 1992, ASWAF Incorporated has been in the business of selling energy drinks and high-protein snacks to its clients and ultimately to end consumers. Over the course of these years, the company has generated massive amounts of wealth, and there's one underlying common theme that every single end consumer looks for when buying the products of Les Assoif Incorporated. It's energy and it's high-protein strength that comes from the snacks to allow individuals to perform their best on a daily basis. So, similar to the success that you've had in your corporation, Les Assoif Incorporated attempts to give these high-energy snacks to your clients, as mentioned earlier. But with all the success comes inevitable tax planning that is required to ensure that moving forward, we can consider all avenues, all legal laws to ensure that moving forward, individuals can be best prepared to minimize and defer tax payable. Good morning. My name is Kieran.
I'm Natasha.
And I'm Mohab.
And we are KNM LLP. Nancy, it was great to meet you at the Women in Business Conference the other day, and I'm so glad that you have come to us with your tax planning issues. So, similar to your very famous and well-known energy drink, Get Ready, we hope to get you guys ready for the future, moving on with an effective tax planning strategy. So, to do so today, our objectives are going to be to minimize and to defer tax payable on multiple transactions. Now, the first of these transactions will be the sale of the corporation, as well as the transfer of the cottage ownership to your son, Justin, as well as various other small tax implications that come with day-to-day business operations. Lastly, we want to ensure that moving forward, there's fairness between yourself, your husband Robert, your son Justin, and maybe any future children or a wife or spouse, common law partner that individual may have. Lastly, we want to ensure that there's an effective tax structure in place to ensure that there are proper precautions in place for the purposes of estate planning. So to do so today, we're going to be discussing the current corporate overview as it stands right now, along with the utilization and the rules belong to the lifetime capital gains exemption and the rules belong to qualified small business corporations. Thirdly, we're going to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, the transfer of ownership of your family business, Les Assoif Incorporated, as well as the transfer of the cottage that your son Justin so dearly loves. And lastly, we're going to touch on some other small tax considerations that are important to consider when moving forward with this venture.
So here we have a current corporate overview represented in a diagram for the chain of ownership for Les Assoifés. So Nancy, you own Nancy Management Inc., which is responsible for, as a holding company, to manage Les Assoifés. So there's a fair value of $2.97 million within Nancy Management, as well as an ACB and a puck of $100. This is owned through 100 Class B common shares, whereas Les Assoifés is owned through 100 Class A common shares by Nancy Management Inc. So as you can see, there is quite a significant difference in between the fair market value and the ACB and puck. So during eventual sale of this company, this would trigger a very large capital gain that our goal would be to minimize. So the way that we would do this is to have you be represented as a qualified small business corporation, or a QSBC. So this concept essentially would entitle you to a lifetime capital gains deduction, which would minimize the amount of tax that you would be paying on the capital gain of the eventual sale. So I understand that the sale will not be occurring in the very near future. It will be beyond 10 years. So this would be something to consider for when Justin eventually decides to sell the company after he has held his term owning it. So there are three major rules that I have up on the board here in order to qualify as a QSBC. The first is that the corporation must be owned by Nancy or a non-arm's length party for 2 years prior to the sale. The second is that 90% of assets at the time of sale must be used to generate active business income in the corporation. And the third is that 50% of assets must have been used to generate active business income for the prior 2 years. So the lifetime capital gains exemption, as I mentioned, is used to offset the taxable capital gains on the sale of Les Assoifés. So the amount is $866,912, and this is eligible to Canadian taxpayers to offset the gain. It does require the QSB status, which unfortunately Les Assoifés currently does not meet. So this is our calculations of the percentage of active business income generating assets. So currently, the assets that are on the board here are active business generating, and they currently represent 83.4% of total assets. So in order to meet the 90% rule, we are going to have to increase the amount of active business income generating assets, as well as reduce the amount of assets that are not doing so. So this would be called purifying the company. So the purification strategy that we have, we do understand that you've estimated that the company will grow in the future to around $2.5 million by the time of retirement, which will be in 10 years. So goodwill is an active business income generating asset. So the amount of goodwill that would be triggered by this $2.5 million increase is expected to lead the company to meet the 90% rule. Another way that you could achieve this objective is to dispose of the life insurance that you do have in your assets, because this is not active business income generating, and this removal of this would lead you to meet the 90% rule.
So now that we have a good overview of how the corporation looks like today, we want to look at some options in order to transfer the corporation to your son. So the first option is to really just sell the corporation to him, and you mentioned that that's a possibility that you can help him finance that purchase. So you could obtain that $1 million, which is the fair market value of the corporation today, through a bank loan. And that bank loan, the interest on that bank loan will be deductible. Then you could loan that money to Justin at an interest-free. However, he would have to pay a taxable benefit at the prescribed rate, which is currently 2%. And then it must be paid back, the loan must be paid back at a reasonable time. So Justin can't pay you back the loan within like 50 years. It has to be within what is deemed to be a reasonable time. The external, however, we don't believe it's very beneficial because Justin will still have to pay the 2% taxable benefit. You'll also have to go through external financing through the bank, so you'll be paying extra interest to the bank, which is not beneficial. And there's also going to be a capital gain that's going to be triggered. The ACV is currently $100. The fair market value is $1 million. So you're going to be almost paying $500,000 as a taxable capital gain. You do have some money left in your lifetime capital exemption. However, you have used a decent amount of it. So you would still pay a decent amount of tax, and you would give up control immediately, which you still said that you want to work for another 10 years.
So we've discussed the option of a bank loan and selling the company to your son Justin, but there's definitely a better alternative, and that comes in the form of an estate freeze. So it can be quite a complicated concept, so what we're going to do is understand each step, how it works, and then also talk about the variety of benefits that arise by using an estate freeze. So in understanding what happens first, we must create a family trust. Now, we're going to call this the Monroe Family Trust. And involved in every single trust is 3 different parties that play integral roles in ensuring that the trust operates effectively and can minimize and defer taxes payable. So the first important party is the settlor. And so it's common and it's important to know that this individual must be an unrelated party who is responsible for forming the trust. In regards to the actual purchase of shares of Les Assoiffés Incorporated, $10 is going to be given to the trust by the settlor, which will come back into play later on. Secondly, the trustees of this family trust are going to be Nancy, yourself, and your son Justin. This makes great sense. Nancy, you want to continue working for the next 10 years, and Justin, you've determined that has exceptional skill and amazing competence to ensure that he can take the reins of your organization and manage it successfully and continue to grow year over year. These individuals are responsible for managing the operations of the trust and how it works. Lastly, the beneficiaries are the last important party. So the beneficiaries are the individuals that receive the financial benefit arising from transactions flowing through the trust. Now, it makes the most sense in this situation, based on several benefits, to include every one of your family members as a beneficiary of this family trust. So Nancy, yourself, Justin, your husband Robert, and then as well as any future family that Justin may have moving forward can be considered as beneficiaries of this trust. Finally, the last important part is the fact that we can also make a corporation a beneficiary of the trust, to which we will discuss various benefits later on. So essentially, it's important to understand right now that there are 100 Class A common shares that Nancy Management owns of Les Assoiffés Incorporated. That means that the fair market value of each share currently lies at $10,000. Now, if you're going to buy one share, that's a lot, and that's a high lump sum to be paying for one single common share. So the first step in the process of creating and completing an estate freeze is going to be completing a 1,000 to 1 stock split, which allows the classic common shares, to now be $100,000. Which means that the fair market value of each common share is going to be $10, and opposed to one $10,000 payment for one common share, each common share is now going to be worth $10. And so, if we consider what had happened before with the $10 that the settler put in, now we can understand that the purchase of one common share could be equal to the amount that the settler put in, which will come back a little bit later. So the next step in this process is to undergo an exchange of common shares for preferred shares. So we're going to exchange all except for one common share, so 99,999 common shares for 99,999 preferred shares. And so what this is going to do is that each preferred share is going to be equal to $1, is going to be redeemable at $1, and it also will be retractable, and it will be a voting preferred share. This will ensure that, Nancy, you can maintain control of the corporation for the next 10 years while you're still operating and working until you become 60 years old and want to retire. So effectively what's going to happen is that, as we mentioned earlier, there were 100,000 common shares that were created through that stock split, but we only exchanged 99,999, which leaves one common share still in the ownership of Nancy Management Incorporated. So effectively, we must understand as to why we're undergoing this process. And so essentially, as Natasha had earlier mentioned, the QSBC status, if all common shares were exchanged for all preferred shares, the QSB status and the 2-year time clock would have to reset and then an eventual sale. If we do want to purify the organization, an eventual QSBC status cannot be used and the individuals cannot use their lifetime capital gains exemption. But by keeping one common share in the ownership of Nancy Management Incorporated and undergoing the process of simply selling the one common share to the family trust in exchange for the $10 put in by the settlor, it ensures that the corporation maintains its qualified small business corporation status and that the beneficiaries of this trust can utilize their lifetime capital gains exemption against eventual sale in the opportunity that there becomes a lucrative offer within the next 2 years that you simply cannot refuse. So this is what the corporate structure will then look like. Nancy Management Incorporated will have 99,999 preferred shares, and the trust will have one common share worth $10.
Yeah, so we really do recommend that you go with this option, and the implementation has many benefits to it. So as we have seen, if you could go back to the last. Yeah, so now there's one common share worth $10. However, any future benefits that come from, like any value that arises from this company is now going to go towards that trust. So the value of Nancy Management Inc. is going to be frozen to that $99,999, and all the future benefits are going to go to the trust. So what that does is that you can multiply the lifetime capital gains exemption. So if you do meet the QSBC, any of the beneficiaries that we mentioned above that are individuals do get that $866,000 of lifetime capital gains exemption. So you can multiply it by however many benefits, and in the case of future children, to Justin, they can also be added to the trust and use the lifetime capital gains exemption. The other main benefit is that the corporation can be transferred for a price of $10. That's it, as opposed to given to $1 million. So Justin will not have to pay any money. $10 is very minimal, and again, the future benefits are all going to be going towards Justin and his family. Thirdly, as safe income is accumulated, so safe income is so as of right now, nothing can be allocated to the trust because all it has in safe income is $10. But as that income in the future is being allocated towards the trust, that will be safe income, which can be used for investments, for example. Or in the case of a sale, so if the company sold in 10 years for $2.5 million, so that $1.5 million extra will be allocated towards the trust. When it's allocated to the beneficiaries, so half of the lifetime capital gains exemption, or half of the gain will be allocated to the beneficiaries, and the other half is going to be remaining in the trust, which can then be invested in public corporations, and then the beneficiaries can take that money and use it for their own benefit. It can be allocated to any beneficiary, and it will be taxed at the marginal rate. So currently she would be taxed at 45%. However, one of Justin's child could be taxed at the lowest marginal rate. Estate planning. So in the case of death, the estate does the company does not die. But however, if it's owned by Nancy directly, when she dies, there would be a deemed disposition. However, with the trust, it would keep going, and there would not be an instant deemed disposition of the trust. It can also be used to motivate employees. So there's currently 5 employees that work. So as soon as the estate freeze is done, again, the common shares are worth $10. You can really elect what value you want it to be worth. So you can give shares to employees. That could be a very good way to motivate them. And it could be used to purify the SWFA in the future as they accumulate safe income. So any bad assets can be allocated to that corporate beneficiary. And corporate beneficiary is one of the main, that's probably the biggest benefit because any dividends, intercompany dividends, up to safe income can be paid in between companies tax-free. So that can defer tax very well for the company. Yeah.
So Nancy, you brought to our concern the raising tax rates for dividend income. We understand that you currently pay yourself a $100,000 salary through the use of dividends. Up here we have the rates on the board. The dividend income tax rate is 37.5%, which is just over 8% lower than the employment income tax rate. However, what we would like to do here is to provide you with earned income. Because dividend income is not considered earned income, it cannot be used for several things that earned income can be used for, such as an RRSP. So earned income is required for important investments such as this, and as you are approaching your retirement, we are going to recommend that you start an RRSP account. So we recommend rather than paying the employment income, rather than paying the dividend income, that you pay yourself an employment income instead, despite the higher tax rate. So RRSP is a registered retirement savings plan. So So you would be contributing to this every year for the next 10 years, and all the contributions that you make will be deductible in the year that you make them, up to your annual contribution limit. So any gains that are accumulated in the RRSP account will be tax-free, and then when you eventually choose to redeem these amounts, when you do finally retire, they will be taxable at the marginal rates. So the reason that this is more of an advantage is because at the time that you are retiring, you will likely be in a lower income tax bracket. So for that reason, you would have less income to be taxed on, and it would be a more advantageous time to be redeeming the RRSP amounts. So we have 3 options here for transferring the cottage to your son, Justin. The first option is the living donation, the second is the preferential pricing, and the third would be to include it as a bequest in your will. So the first option, the donation, would include transferring the funds to Justin for the purpose of purchasing the cottage. It will be considered a gift to Justin, which in tax scenarios is typically not a good thing, because this would be included in his taxable income. It would be a very large amount to be paying tax on, as the value of the cottage, we found that the difference between fair market value and ACV was over $95,000. So this will be taxed as a deemed disposition for Nancy as well. So all in all, it would not be an advantageous situation for either of you.
So the second option that you mentioned is preferential pricing. However, that's from a tax perspective, that's very bad because you would still be having deemed disposition at that price of the fair market value, so you'd still pay the same amount of tax regardless of how much you sell it for. And for Justin, his ACV would now be lower. So whenever he sells it, say he sells the cottage in 10 years, instead of having an ACV that's, for example, whatever it is right now, if it's elected to be at like 90,000, that's going to be his ACV, so it's going to trigger a bigger capital gain in the future. Therefore, we recommend that you do go with the bequest in will, and that will happen upon death. The cottage will be transferred to Justin. There will be there will be no, like, Justin will not need to buy it. It will be transferred to him. However, there will be a deemed disposition. So again, there will be a capital gain, but that's the most beneficial option. So other tax considerations, you mentioned that in your Nancy Investments Corporation, there is some investments that you haven't advised to sell. So we thought that this is really up to you, what your risk tolerance is. So if you find that, if you're expecting a downturn and you don't want to take the risk of your investments going down in value, then it could be beneficial to sell. Like a good option to do this would be looking at the investments that currently have a capital loss. So you could use those to offset capital gains against the riskiest investments you have at the moment. But if you have gains with investments that are not very risky, it could be very good to wait and not to sell them and use the capital losses to offset them.
Lastly, the last consideration is considered to be tax on split income. Now, effectively what this is that Justin and Nancy are both involved in the corporation. However, Justin's involvement with the organization, he's been working full-time and uses his finance degree to use within the organization. As such, we consider that his $85,000 salary is reasonable, and his organization is considered to be investment business. Nancy owns the shares of the organization, therefore she considers to be her income and dividends is totally excluded. We hope today that we've discussed relevant issues and that we've solved.
Sit down.
Thank you.
I would like to start with your suggestion for purification of the company to disposal of the life insurance. How do you suggest to do this? Because there's probably some income taxation impact.
Yeah, for sure. So if it were to be done after the estate freeze, so that could be one of the benefits of the corporate beneficiary, for example. So you could dividend in kind that amount to the corporate beneficiary, and as long as there's safe income, so as long as there's basically retained earnings in the corporation, you can allocate that to the corporate beneficiary, which will not be a QSBC. The corporate beneficiary is not intended to be a QSBC, it's intended to hold investments and passive income. However, through that dividend in kind, now the corporation, it will be tax-free because it's between companies, and the corporation will meet the 90% rule.
A question for the transfer of cottage. You propose 3 ways to for the donation, for the transfer. Which one is the best for you?
I forgot to mention that. So the best one is the bequest and will, because that does not require a capital to be given by Justin. So Justin will receive it upon death, upon like passing away of his mother. And there will be a capital gain that will be for the mother. Like that's the best way we saw it, because with having it at a preferential price, it's really not beneficial, because she's still going to be paying the same amount of tax, and he's going to have a lower ACB. So even though he paid the lower capital, but she's paying the same amount of tax as the fair market value, and his ACB is going to trigger a bigger capital gain. And for the donation, it would be considered a gift, so it would still be the same tax implications.
So I've got a question. So if Nancy suffers a critical illness or a disability within the next 10 years, what's the game plan? What's the strategy?
Yeah, so that's one of the main reasons that we recommend an estate freeze, because she's basically going to be given control to Justin. So because her and Justin are the trustees at the moment, it would be shared. The control would be 50-50. So he can take over, and she can redeem. So if she needs more capital, she can redeem her preferred shares. And what the redemption of the preferred shares, what that would do is it would be a deemed dividend. So she would pay as if she receives an ineligible dividend, depending if there's scrip or not. However, he can still control the company and make all the decisions. And as she needs more and more cash, either through because she's also a beneficiary of the trust. So if she needs more money, it can be allocated through the trust or by redeeming her preferred shares, which are worth almost $1 million.
I think Nancy's main issue was that she wants to ensure that the corporation is continuing the success it's had since the beginning of the 1990s, and she really believes that Justin is prepared and ready to take on the challenge, and he believes himself that he can do so. So by making them both trustees, which then own the corporation, there's SWAF A Incorporated, then they're both in the proper spot to ensure that the organization continues.
Do you believe that she believes that he's going to be ready in 10 years, or he's ready tomorrow if something happens to her?
So from what we understand is that he already has a degree in finance, and he's already very involved in all aspects of the business. Okay. So he, from what we've read about his career, what we've understood about his implication in the business, it seems like he's ready today. Obviously, the more experience, the better. However, if in that case he's ready and she seems to trust him, so we believe that he would be able to take over the business.
To come back to the cottage, is there a way to know if it's better to allocate the residence exemption to the house or to the cottage?
Yeah, for sure. So right now, we looked at which one has the bigger capital gain.
Okay.
So the house currently has a capital gain of $150,000, and the cottage has $95,000. So it would seem like it's a better option to allocate it to the house. Because it has a bigger capital gain. However, it really depends on when they're trying to sell and what their preferences are. Because the CRA allows you a +1 rule. So you get how many years you allocate +1. And the house they acquired in 1992, and the cottage was built in 1995. So they also have 3 additional years. So 3 + 1 is 4 years allocated over the 28 years since 1992. It lowers the capital gain. So it really depends on when they're planning to sell. Do they want to sell the house now? What about the cottage?
La période de gestion est terminée.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Merci.
Merci.